Hello and welcome to episode 113 of Around the Lens, your live weekly visual journalism roundtable show coming at you every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. I am your host, David J. Murphy. With me this week is my co-host, Ron Hamilton. Ron, how you doing, buddy?
Another beautiful day here in Hawaii.
Indeed. Hawaii with lots of protesters, right?
The protesters have all gone home. The people are just back to the beach. Everything's nice and peaceful now.
Why are you covering protests in Hawaii?
Why are we covering protests? Or we're excited about something exciting happening here.
Yeah.
Why are the protests? You know, Dave, it was a great travesty committed over 100 years ago. The poor Hawaiian people were here, and as you're familiar with in your mainland there, they had the Indians come and white men took their land, and the same thing happened here on the islands. So people are still upset about that. Yeah, I don't know why, but for some reason they're upset.
Indeed, indeed. All right, and he might as well be a co-host, Craig Stampley.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening. Get it wrong every time.
It's okay. You're Australian.
Yeah.
We give you a pass.
Thank you. Thank you.
Craig, you've been on the show for like the last 4 weeks, so you are an honorary co-host at this point, in my opinion.
I'll get a little badge or something.
Yeah. Maybe I'll send you like a coffee cup with the logo on it. How about
there
that?
You go. I'll take it.
Anything interesting happened to you in the last week or so?
Last week's been relatively quiet, catching up on some paperwork and working on some client files, and that's really about it. Yeah, not too much. We've had lots of summer storms, so that slowed things down a little bit.
All right. Well, I want to introduce our guest this week, joining us for a wonderful roundtable panel discussion, Miss Evelyn Hochstein. Hello, Evelyn. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am a photojournalist based in Washington, D.C. I've been here about 8 years. I freelance primarily for the Washington Post. So you can mostly see my images there, a few other newspapers, a Swedish newspaper, Finnish newspaper, some other American newspapers. And before that, I was in Nairobi, Kenya for 7 years.
Oh my gosh.
I worked for the New York Times as a freelancer, and I covered the whole continent. I was there for about 7 years.
Wow.
And prior to that, I started my career based in Jerusalem in the Reuters Bureau, first as an intern, then as a stringer. I covered the Middle East for Knight Ridder, and then became McClatchy. Actually, no, it became McClatchy when I moved to Kenya. Anyway, so I've been around. I've worked in about 70 countries.
Wow.
And DC is home. I'm from Maryland originally, so I ended up back here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite the introduction there, and that's probably the most worldly of any of the guests we've had, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Where are you from originally? You said
I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland.
Silver Spring, Maryland. Okay,
Just
great.
outside of DC. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So you've always kind of been around the, at least born and raised around, or not raised, but obviously you're back to where you started, so to speak.
Yeah, I was abroad for about 11 years, and it was great, and I loved it, and I definitely miss it, but this is home, and I felt like 11 years is a long time to be away, so I came back here to put some roots down and see what I had no idea what it would be like to work in the United States. I mean, this was like being a foreign correspondent in a way when I came back, because I truly worked for about 1 year in the United States at small newspapers, and then just packed my bags at 22, moved to Jerusalem with literally no job, nothing, walked into the Reuters office and was really lucky and got hired as an intern on the spot. And then the second Intifada started. And so I was sort of in the right place at the right time and no idea. I mean, I wanted to go abroad, and I had made some inquiries to editors about what's a good place. And they said, and I was very green. I mean, I was 22. I'd only worked at small papers. So I sort of had this idea of going to Northern Ireland because I'd been there and I'd covered some summer protests, or Israel, because that was always a hot spot. And they said, well, Ireland's only a story once in a while, and Israel is always a story. And little did I know, it really did become the biggest story in the world in the years that I was there. So,
wow.
Yeah,
well, we're going to talk about that in detail. I definitely want to give you, quiz you and pick your brain on all the different aspects of, that's our topic this evening. Of course, the differences between, working in an overseas location, working in the United States, how you kind of adjust to both. But I did want to bring up the way I found you. And of course, you were covering the inauguration like many of us, or many photojournalists were. And you had a very interesting, striking photo, which I'm going to bring on to, if you're watching this on Google Hangouts or on our Facebook page after the fact, you can see this. But Evelyn shot a photograph from the I'm sorry, let me just get this loaded
inauguration.
There we go. Hopefully it's up. Yeah. From the inauguration that I think, again, was picked as one of the top 100 photos of the 2017 by Time. And I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit about this photo and your experience covering the inauguration and kind of what it was like to be featured on this list of top 100 photos of the year.
Okay, you broke up in the middle of the question, but I think the question was, what was it like covering inauguration and to be on the list? Did I get that right? Okay. It's funny that this photo of all the photos I've shot this year is in the list. I mean, I think it's a good photo and I think it's unique, and we don't get to see Barron very often. And I think well, I'll get into what I think about the photo, but I hardly cover politics, even though I work in Washington, D.C. I'm very rarely on the Hill or the White House. I shoot features mostly. So, I had covered Charlottesville and all these other things, and I just thought it was just odd that this was the one, the photo that ran, but it was great. I mean, I shoot for the Post, so I'm not a staffer, so I'm not going to have like the primo spot on the Hill or on the Capitol steps or anything like that. But I was definitely part of the team coverage, so I had a spot on the parade route, and the whole time that the inauguration was happening, there were protests happening, and I just wanted to like leave. It was a really quiet. You're basically standing on a bandstand on Pennsylvania Avenue, waiting for the motorcade to drive past, where you may or may not see anyone inside. They may get out and walk, which is what you're always hoping for. They may drive past. They may not be. They could be looking out the other side. So it's a real crapshoot, and you wait all day, and it's cold. You get there very early because of security. So I was like itching to get out and cover, burning cars and rioters and all this crazy stuff. And my editor told me to stay put, obviously. And this happened, and Barron just was looking out the window in this state of awe, shock. Like, he's a young boy, he's just sort of taking it all in. And I think it's really great that we don't spend a lot of time focusing on any children of presidents. I think we should let them have their childhood, but they are people and they have personalities, and we are curious about them. And I think that his face just says it all. I mean, it's so compelling, and you just put yourself in his place. Like, wow, what is my world going to be like? My new home, my new school, everybody's looking at me. My dad is the president, and I find it pretty fascinating. And that's what I like about the photo. I think it sort of takes you into his world, which is very hard to see.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely something we saw a lot of him on Inauguration Day, with obviously it was going with the president, and pretty much after that, it's been, I don't think I've seen a single, maybe I've seen a photo or two of him, but I think that's about it. It seems like they've been trying to kind of shield him from the limelight, kind of like what they did with, like I said, most presidential children, they're there for the initial. And then after that, they're left alone and allowed to be children. So I think, I agree with you. That's a great thing.
I think it's nice too. If I can just say one other thing, that we cover, covering politics in Washington, it's all through an adult lens, and it's kind of interesting to see, like, a child's, even if it's not Barron, but just sort of a kid's awe and wonder at this, whole spectacle, or fear. He's in a different position, but it's kind of. I don't know. I don't see a lot of kids in the Washington scene, so it's sort of different that way. Yeah.
Have you seen him? And since you obviously cover DC, have you seen him around at all at anything?
No. Okay. And I haven't done anything at the White House.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and talk about you, and talk about moving overseas. So let's go ahead and talk about your story. So. You started out, obviously you were in the United States, and you took an assignment to kind of work overseas in Jerusalem, you said, right? That was your first overseas assignment? Or
I didn't have an assignment. So basically, I didn't study photojournalism, but I wanted to be, like, I worked in my college newspaper, and I sort of figured out this is what I want to do. And I really didn't know how to go about doing it. So I guess this is a lesson for anyone listening that wants to figure this out. But, I joined like the MPPA and the student, then, I entered a student clip contest and I won something, and that gave me a little, boost to my spirit. And I thought, hey, maybe I can do this. So I really didn't know what to do, but I put a portfolio together. I applied to all these internships, and my very first well, I did intern at the Hill newspaper first when I graduated and lived at home. And then I had enough of that after like 4 months, but that was a great experience. Then I went to the Bay City Times in Michigan, which is a very small paper that felt very foreign coming from the East Coast. I may have been a little bit sheltered. I just hadn't spent time in that part of the world, and ice fishing and hunting, and it was very different, and people were wonderful. And that was 4 months because these are all internships. And then I got to the New London Day for my next internship. And at that point I thought, okay, I'm not going to get hired by the New York Times or the LA Times. I'm not, I don't know. I didn't see that happening. And I'm pretty adventurous. So I just thought, I'm going to go, abroad. Like, where can I go? So I put this more updated portfolio together. I talked to a couple editors. No one guaranteed me any sort of job or work, but they just sort of advised me that the Jerusalem bureau, there may be a chance for me. And I did go. I literally took a box of CDs. So this was in like 1998, I guess. I had a box of CDs. I sold them all in the Day newsroom for like $5 a pop, and I made about $200. And I used that towards my plane ticket. I had a friend who was going to college in Jerusalem, and I just slept on her floor in her dorm room. And I went to the AP. I had heard I had a name at the AP, and I walked in. And they said, "Well, we like your work, but we don't have any jobs for you." And then I went to Reuters, and my boss, Jim Hollander, said, "Hey, I'd love to have an intern." And they hired me, and they paid me a little bit. I mean, it was enough to sort of live on. And that was it. I mean, it was just a crapshoot, and I think I got really lucky. So that's how I ended up there. And I think my family thought that I was probably a little bit crazy, and they were worried about me, and what are you doing? And this isn't a real career, and you studied history and political science. Don't you want to be a lawyer? Whatever, like the usual path is that one might take. I mean, because I didn't study journalism or, photography or anything. It turned into 4 years because I was interning at Reuters. Then I became a stringer. Then I was like working on the weekend, covering the desk on the weekends. And then the Intifada was, just blowing up. And then there was tons of work, and I had lots of freelance. I just started getting freelance clients. And then I went to Syria and Iraq during Saddam and Lebanon. I can go on and on, but I can get more specific too. So just cut me off because I'll start to babble. But
And then after you were in Jerusalem, you went to Africa and worked there for 7 years.
Yeah. So 4 years in Israel, covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was a lot. I mean, it was at the time, it was like the suicide bombings were happening, and we had beepers and like big cell phones. And it was like a bombing in Israel, a retaliation, in Gaza, then you're in Ramallah, then you're in Tel Aviv, then you're in Hebron. It was pretty exhausting. And, it was an amazing experience, but that was a lot, 4 years. And I felt like I wanted to change. So I applied for a journalism fellowship, and I got to go, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was the IRP program, if anybody's heard of it. And I got to go travel to Tajikistan and work on a little project there. And then I had made connections when I was in Jerusalem. So a reporter who had flown in, like a fireman, to cover the Intifada was based in Nairobi. He said, "Come to Nairobi, there'll be tons of work there." So yet again, like no job, no anything. He worked for McClatchy. And he said, "Come stay at my house. You'll find a place to live. You'll have tons of work." I get there, and literally he's like, "We have no more budget for the rest of the year."
Oh, no.
So, but I started freelancing for the New York Times. I mean, they needed to give you a call one day. They need somebody, and that was the start of a good, relationship. And I did work for McClatchy in like the following calendar year when they had more money. And then eventually I was like almost only working for the New York Times and NGO clients. I did a lot of NGO work. Nice, so they were my primary news client. Yeah, it was great.
Just to let you know, it seems like your microphone on your headphones are rubbing against your clothes a little bit. So yeah, there, just give that a little bit of space. But so talk to me a little bit about, working overseas versus working in the United States. Like, what was sort of the biggest difference you saw? I guess you can talk, since you've been so long at 3 different locations, right? Give me the differences between, working in the United States, working in Israel, and working in Africa. Like, what were the core differences between those 3 countries?
Okay. Well, being based in Jerusalem, covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that was the primary story. So I did cover other things in the Middle East, but that was like a full-time story. So I wasn't really traveling, and it was just major news all the time. So I was basically focused between the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. Although I did take these other trips, but so that was more of a narrow focus, I suppose, even though it's a very broad and complicated story.
Right.
You're looking at that one story from many angles. Being based in Nairobi, and unfortunately, you know, it's not like maybe a major newspaper. Okay, back in the day, they had a West Africa bureau, an East Africa bureau, and a South Africa bureau. And I think everybody's pretty much down to one bureau to cover the entire continent of Africa now. Now, that's partly, you can say that's because people are less interested in Africa, it has less relevance or less importance, or, you know, whatever the reason is, and maybe Europeans cover it more than Americans. But also, we're going from like the late 90s when I first started my career to the mid 2000s, and newspapers were collapsing and downsizing, and there was no money anymore in journalism. So when I was working as a freelancer in like 2000, let's say, I could stay in a nice hotel and I had an expense account and I could hire fixers. I frankly, I made the same amount of money in 1999 as I made on a day rate or more in 2018. I mean, that's the truth. It's really kind of crazy, which is depressing for freelancers. And that's, you know, it can be hard. But so newspapers just shrunk, staff shrunk. So I think that's so back to Nairobi. So, you know, you're talking about covering in the entire continent of Africa. So that's like 50 some stories. You know, there's a story in every country, multiple stories. So you're not singularly focused. So you're looking at broader themes. You have to know a little bit about everything. There are similarities, obviously, if you're looking at health or food insecurity or drought. Those would be similar issues you could look at in multiple countries. But then when I was there, you had Darfur happening. So that was probably the biggest story of my time in Africa. So I was one of the first people there in 2004. And then, am I boring you?
No.
Was that I just saw you.
I have two small children, so I don't get much sleep at night.
No, it's okay. I'm choosing. So Darfur was a huge story. And then sadly, when my last year in Kenya was when the Kenya sort of erupted in political violence. So for me, that was a very monumental story. Oh, and Congo was in war, was blowing up in war all the time in Eastern Congo. So yeah, I mean, that's why it was totally different. You're covering a massive continent. You're flying all the time. You're going to different countries. South Africa. I mean, yeah. Hopefully that answered your question.
Was there any sort of difficulty working in these countries versus working in the United States? Like, I mean, obviously, you know, Jerusalem, most people speak English. Africa, though, I know that's a little bit more difficult. So, I mean, did you have to rely on fixers more in Africa than in Jerusalem?
Yeah, okay. I realize now you asked me also about the United States, but back to Africa and the Middle East. Yeah, in the Palestinian side, you'd always need to use fixers. I don't speak Arabic. People do speak English, but you would generally like go into the West Bank and need someone to guide you around. And it was also a very tense time. So people were maybe distrustful of foreign journalists in different ways than they are post 9/11. That was a very marked thing. I mean, that changed journalism working in the Middle East completely. So I never felt really unsafe working in these areas. But you wanted a guide to say, hey, Evelyn's okay. She works for Reuters, or she works for Knight Ridder, or she's Miami Herald, Philadelphia Inquirer, whatever newspaper I was working for. And she's cool, and people trust these fixers, and they know they're, you know, doing right. So I had a lot of good friends there, so I could go in and link up with the Reuters correspondents, and I didn't always need a fixer, but you often, like, in Gaza and those places, would work with fixers because you needed a driver, you needed all these things. You cross the border from Israel into Gaza, let's say, you can't bring your car. So you're going to be working with people on the ground. Africa, a lot of people speak English in capitals. If it was an English-speaking country, obviously a lot of people speak French also. But again, yes, you often need it. I mean, these are huge places that you're visiting. They're totally foreign. I mean, I could get an assignment in Angola. I've never been to Angola in my life. So, you know, you definitely need to work with locals. And it's great. You know, you work with local journalists or local drivers, and you get to know people. And You need that. That's an important part of working in these places, unless you're going with an NGO and they're guiding you.
Okay, so in those instances, like they're taking you there, or they're with you the whole time, or how's that?
Like if you're going to go to Mogadishu or something, that was a really scary, dangerous, hard place to get to, and extremely. I mean, sometimes I think about, like, I was in Mogadishu and then the next day a foreign journalist was killed, like in the same spot. Wow. But this group of journalists were in. You know, it's so if you were going to go to a place like that, you very well may need to go in with World Food Program, WFP, to take you in on their planes. There's no commercial aircraft, and you have to find a way to get in, and they're going to go in for like 6 hours, do a humanitarian mission. You can scurry around a little bit and interview people in that capacity, and then you would fly out.
You know, you covered some dangerous stuff. Was that something that, you know, did you ever, you know, you were there for so long, but did you ever question being there, being like how dangerous it was in either or? I mean, obviously you were in conflict zones in both locations, you know, kind of what was your sort of, was there a sort of a level of which you're like, okay, this is, you know, this is only so much violence or only so much, you know, potential death I can stand right now. I'm going back to, you know, back to the house or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think after a few years you get older also. I've been in several dangerous situations. I got hijacked and held at gunpoint for a while in Darfur, and that was probably the scariest incident. And I mean, I was fine, and I went back to Darfur after that, but I looked at it in a way that I sort of thought, okay, these risks are real. I'm not like 25. I didn't think the same way as I did when I was 25, that nothing could happen to me. I mean, I was starting to see people get kidnapped, or I knew someone was killed in a plane crash. I mean, it just, life goes on, and you feel like your number is going to come up at some point. Like you have 9 lives and you're running out of time. And actually, I remember this about David Gilkey, who we all remember very well. We worked together well, we didn't work together, but he came to Kenya a lot when he was working for Detroit Free Press, which was part of McClatchy. So we were just, anyway, we were sort of connected, working on the same stories, but he would maybe do a story for a month and then I would go into Darfur or something. But I got to know him pretty well. And he said to me, he talked about the 9 lives thing. You know, he would wear these bracelets on his wrist, and like when he would survive a really dangerous situation, you know, he would, like, one of them would come off. And so I don't know what number he was on in Afghanistan, but yes, I mean, it gets to a point where you realize this is real. And I think, like, lying face down in a ditch in Darfur with a gun pointed at the back of my head was definitely a time when I thought that I could get killed doing this. And I just always wanted to be extremely sure that I knew there are risks in everything you do. I mean, you could be in a car accident. There's always danger. But really calculated, like, it had to really be worth it, because it's just not worth getting killed. And I love what I do, but I don't think I'm as brave, maybe. And I think it's not bravery, it's more just reality that, you know, something really could happen to you. And I did go back to Darfur after that happened to me, but I would never do what I did. Like, the UN was flying helicopters to get from point A to point B, and I went in a convoy with an NGO, which was really stupid, and we got hijacked. So yeah, I wouldn't do that again. But, you know, and in retrospect, I probably should have realized that. But, you know, there are security teams, and they said it was okay. So you do these things, but you just have to think about them. The last conflict zone I went to was in Ukraine, and I think that was enough for me. There were bullets flying over my head. It was not a great experience. And I want to cover, the thing is, I want to cover the humanitarian side of these things. So just putting yourself in danger for the sake of the adrenaline or being in danger, if I can't get the pictures, then forget it. It's not worth it. You know, I want to cover the refugees in the war zone. I don't necessarily need to be covering the bang bang, but I want to see what's happening to people that are casualties of fighting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Did you think your position as a woman, or, you know, being white, did that have any impact or factor with regard to your ability to either get access to areas or not get access to areas? Do you think that had any influence or impact on, you know, any location you've shot at, you know, in either, like, you know, Israel or Africa?
That is an interesting question, and you never truly know the answer. You know, people are very hospitable. People want to talk to foreign journalists. So you don't know if it's because you're a woman or if you're a Westerner. I know that in some Muslim countries that I work in, you know, women would not get to do, Muslim women would not get to do what I would do. But because I was a foreigner, I was sort of given a pass and I was treated like a man in these situations. So I think that I was lucky. It may be easier for men to work in some countries, but it's also easier for women to get to work with women in these countries because we have access in ways that men don't. So there are advantages and disadvantages. As far as being white, I think it's not so much about being white as it is about being foreign. You know, you're not from that country. You're a foreigner. Now, there is something to be said about how people perceive whites, or, you know, this role that they play. And sometimes people can be deferential, or they think you have some power or you can help them. There is a power dynamic, but I mean, I can't say that it would be any different if I was, you know, an African-American correspondent working for the New York Times versus a white, you know, correspondent working for the New York Times.
Yeah. So you've been back in the United States for how long now?
Almost 9 years. It's
wow.
about 9 years. Yeah.
So now you're back. I mean, you know, how has sort of the experience, I mean, I'm obviously, I'm sure you're glad you had the experience working overseas. But like you said, you've kind of wanting to, you know, set your roots here back in the United States. Do you ever think you'll live overseas or work overseas, you know, in that long-term capacity again, or you think you're done with that?
Well, it's interesting. The first couple of years that I came back, I was going back to Kenya like twice a year, or at least twice a year. I was still doing a lot of NGO work. So I was getting my fill and still spending a lot of time there. But it's really dwindled in the last few years. I did go to Africa once this year for an NGO, and I now cover Haiti a lot more, which is closer. And I went to Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States, but still, that was prior to the hurricane. But
okay,
I'm not traveling. But so I do still do these trips, but not in the same capacity. And I love it when I go. I mean, I do miss it, but I really like covering the United States also because it's still sort of vast and foreign to me and unique.
Right.
But would I go back? Yeah, if it was if I had the right opportunity, I think I would. I loved Kenya. I used to say that I could live there forever when I was there, and if I didn't have family back in the States, I would consider it. But it's changed a lot since I left, and it's in a lot of political turmoil. And it's not that I wouldn't want to live in a challenging place, but I think it's just a different country than the country that I left. And that's good in a good way. I mean, it's developed a lot, but that creates a lot of chaos, like and for anybody who's worked in like, you know, like Egypt or Nigeria or any of these countries, I mean, you have to like deal with India, pollution, traffic, life can be difficult. So I'm not so sure I would want to go back and live. I just visited India. A friend of mine is a correspondent there, and the air pollution was so bad. I don't think I could live there for 4 years. I mean, I think it would take months off my life.
Right.
So it's tough. So I would like to just go back on short stints.
Okay. Let's go back 9 years to the heady days of 2009 when we were young, innocent. Yes. It was eternal summer. And you're coming back to America, you know, coming back to America for the first time after being gone for 11 years, or maybe you visited back. I'm sure you visited your family, but you know, you're coming back to obviously work and start, you know, doing jobs here. How do you adjust from, you know, covering these monumentally important and magnanimous stories about conflict and stuff, and you're going back to America and now you're shooting, you know, I don't know, people on the Hill walking to their building, or, you know, these stories that, you know, like when you compare them to conflict and death and dying, and it's like, this is not the same, you know, how did you adjust back to American kind of documentation?
That is a very good question, and one I often get. But I mean, the stories that I cover here, even when they're small, they're not always life or death, but the issues are fundamentally the same. I mean, we're covering like healthcare. I cover that in the United States. I covered that abroad. You know, maybe people aren't dying of HIV like they were when I was living in Africa, but think about what's going on with healthcare in the United States. I mean, we have I mean, you know, these are really big issues. I haven't covered them in depth. So maybe the question is more, I mean, look at the opioid crisis. My goodness. I mean, the pictures I just saw of James Nachtwey are like really not, they're just as shocking as anything you would cover abroad. or we have natural disasters here. So, but yes, my day-to-day assignments are not for like going to end up on the front page of the New York Times. So, because you cover those stories because they are huge and there's a war or something going on. But you know, yesterday I covered assignment. It was in the Washington Post today on the front of the Metro section about a statue that was being unveiled for the former Chilean ambassador who was murdered in Washington, D.C. in 1976 in a bomb. And I wasn't expecting it to be a very visual or touchy. I just didn't really know that much about it. I just got this assignment. It was on a Sunday. And it actually turned out to be a really sort of beautiful experience. And I talked with these three sons who had lost their father in a bombing. And maybe that's a little bit foreign, but anyway, it was in Washington, D.C. And I've covered, I had a picture in the paper today of a white supremacist rally in Tennessee. So there are big stories here, but I think I like the everyday day-to-day struggle, like doing a story about the school system in DC, what's broken or what's working, or a great teacher, or, a fire, or even a story on the Hill, or I did a perp walk this week of Rick Gates coming out of court. I mean, it's always different. So I think it keeps me, every day is different. So, and unique. And I've covered sexual assault on college campuses. These are big issues, they just maybe look different than they look in Nairobi. I mean, maybe it's not as life and death where people are really starving, but there are hungry people here. Everyone's struggling basically with the same issues, but on different levels. So, and I'm getting to know the United States too. I mean, there's so many places, I was in Grundy, Virginia, covering, Coal Town and their Trump supporters about a month ago. And that was like being in a foreign country. I really didn't have a lot besides being American with most of these people. And it was really fascinating to hear people's stories and talk to them or hear their history, family histories or their struggles. So I'm interested. Yeah.
Was it weird coming back to America the first time? Like, again, when you were coming back to live there, was it like, oh man, things have changed? How often did you come back when you were living overseas?
I tried to come home once a year, and I had would have people come visit. Yeah. At least I sometimes would go every like 8-9 months. So maybe.
Well, was there that adjustment period? Like, I can walk down to the store without needing a security guard, or, I don't need a fixer to go to the market.
Yeah, no, there was a huge adjustment. I think it's like the excess and the things. I'm totally, it's been 9 years here, so I probably don't even pay attention to it. But I think it's pretty shocking when you first come back and just think about American consumption. And you probably are really annoying that first your adjustment period, because you sort of, look at everything from a different perspective. And I was just living in impoverished Africa, and people are living, in huts, not to stereotype, but, people really are struggling to get a good meal a day, and often, or kids are on streets, sniffing glue, this was just like right outside my house in Nairobi. Every day I would talk to these kids who were, sniffing glue and begging. You just don't really see that here, even though you see homeless people. So I think, the consumption, the excess, just sort of American attitudes, the bigness of everything probably took a while to adjust to. But this is a really great country. So everything that we're going through, I think living abroad for 11 years, I have a lot of positive and warm feelings about everything that's happening here. Even when we're going through difficult times, the freedoms that we have are pretty amazing. We need to keep them and fight for them, but and I don't think that anything should be taken for granted. I think we can see that, but this is a pretty great place. But yes, it was very hard to adjust. I missed Africa. There was a real simplicity, and that also sounds like a stereotype. I don't mean that it was a simple place. I just mean it was a different way. It was different. It was like living the West Coast versus the East Coast. There was just a different sort of vibe.
Africa, it's just like the West Coast. Got it. Okay. Quote, unquote.
No, I did not say that. I did not say
that. I know. I was deployed for 3 months. I was living in, Iraq, and, when I came back, obviously there was that sort of, the jarringness of what we in America sort of focus on and, find and make important, and what they're obviously important is over there. And it's just like, totally different worlds. Totally different worlds.
Well said. I think you said it better than I could. But yes, it's like what you value. And there is a difference.
Absolutely. Did you ever do any work in the Philippines, Hawaii, or Australia?
Nope. Need to go to all three of those places. I would love to.
Come on down.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go down to Hawaii. You go down to Australia. Craig will be your fixer.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Security.
Okay.
Yep.
He can protect you from the kangaroos and the wallabies.
That's it.
You go to Hawaii. Ron can protect you from the protesters.
Sounds good.
Ron or Craig, do you guys have any questions for Evelyn?
Just the idea, Evelyn. No, it's really inspiring, the things you have to say, and I'm really impressed with your story. And then
thank you.
I work for a Philippine TV station myself, and that's where they've got the Philippines from. And they're also very interested. They're also they're watching here the live stream, and they just wanted to let you know that it's an inspiration. Even
you're breaking up. I lost that last part.
Oh dear. Just you're an inspiration to all women around the world.
No, I heard the live up to the live. Thank you. That's awesome. I'm glad. I'm so glad. But you said you were on live stream and then you got cut off.
So Evelyn, maybe you should go to Philippines and cover the drug epidemic over there. The way their president is dealing with it. I have seen some very interesting photos from that whole.
Might be a little bit scary.
Yeah. Well, you're into it. You want to get the rush.
Yes, maybe. I don't know. Philippines, yeah. I don't want to get too political, but it looks, I don't know what it's like for journalists there, but I think it's pretty bad, right? I mean.
No, it's fine.
It's fine? Okay.
Believe the hype.
All right.
Just the guy who's in Hawaii.
Right.
Anyways. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our next topic. We can come back to this if we think of anything interesting, but I'm a big fan of Panasonic. I see you have a Canon camera behind you, Evelyn. So you probably don't use the Micro Four Thirds medium too much, I would imagine, or have you ever used a Micro Four Thirds camera or the Panasonic GH series of cameras?
Nope.
So it's all Canon. What are you using right now?
5D Mark IVs.
5D Mark IV. Okay. No 1DX? I figure you big time. Oh, okay.
I'm a freelancer. It's bad enough having to buy the 5D Mark IV.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I can't even imagine going. I don't even know what they cost, but
yeah. You shoot any video with that?
I do not for any of my news clients here, but occasionally for some NGO clients, I'll do some B-roll.
Okay. Yeah. And do you shoot 4K?
So these are relatively new cameras. So I was shooting video on the 5D Mark IIIs. So I guess you did ask me if I shot video on this, but I don't think so. I don't think the Mark IIIs were 4K, were they?
No, they introduced the 4K into the 4.
So so no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I only ask because I know that using 4K on the Canon cameras are kind of a little bit tough because they crop in a little bit. But anyways, like I said, I'm a big Panasonic user. I love the GH series of cameras. I've got the GH5, and I saw this news story here about Panasonic coming out with sensors that use 8K and shoot 60 frames per second and HDR and have what I think is the most important thing actually is the global shutter. Because if any of us have used DSLRs to shoot video, you get that jelly video camera. When you're moving back and forth really fast, you get that jelly vision because it's using the shutter that's like going up and down. But a global shutter, if anyone if you use video, is it captures the entire sensor at the same time all the time. So it gets rid of that jelly vision effect.
The jelly wobble.
Yes, the wobble. So anyways, I was really excited about this because I see if you're playing with this technology now, I can hopefully expect to find it in maybe the GH6 or 7, maybe down the road. And I'm really excited about that. I mean, I think 8K is a pretty exciting format to shoot video in. I'm a little bit worried about it just because of how big the file sizes are going to be and how hard it is going to be to actually edit that video. I'm going to have to do an upgrade here to actually mess with anything 8K related, but I'm excited by that. What about you guys? Do you think this is a exciting time for us? Does this Panasonic technology here intrigue you? Do you think this is going to be something you're going to invest in a few years? We'll start with you, Craig.
Not until it's available on a Canon, I think. I'm a Canon shooter also, and I don't do a lot of video. Mainly for me, it's personal stuff if I'm doing video at all.
Right.
Yeah, for me, it's mainly stills. So I want the clarity of a still. I have a 5D Mark III and a 2, and Yeah, yeah, it's all stills for me.
Speaking of stills, I mean, the Canon just came out with the M50. Does that intrigue you at all?
That does, purely for the smaller form factor, quieter shutter, things like that, and to be able to, for the events and things that I do, or weddings or what have you, where I need to be quiet, a nearly silent shutter would be handy, and you can get an adapter to put the conventional EF lenses on the Micro Four Thirds body. So that's intriguing. It'll be interesting to see if they come out with a full frame mirrorless. That's the rumors for later this year. So I don't know. At the moment, the M50 sounds very, very interesting.
Right.
The specs seem suitable for what I would need it for in terms of low light, and the fact that I can still use all my lenses with just a simple adapter is a bonus.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the holy grail there, is that you have a Canon camera that's mirrorless, full frame, and it uses the same amount of all your Canon lenses. So you get all that functionality without having to buy the whole new lens kit or deal with an adapter.
No. Well, funnily enough, I was looking at the Canon M50 specs yesterday, and actually went on Canon's site here in Australia and just looked at how much the adapter is, and it's listed as $129 Australian. So that's less than $100 US.
Right.
So you have that adapter on the body, and then off you go. I've got a 24 to 70, 70 to 200, some bigger zooms, some primes. I don't have to replace any of that. I've just got a smaller form factor body that, as long as I can still use it in low light, would work for me.
Yeah. I'd love to come back to Canon. I had the Canon 5D Mark II. That was my main go-to camera for years. I had the full kit. But, again, I saw the other manufacturers just making leaps and bounds ahead in so many different areas. And I was like, come on, Canon, come on, please put out something I want to buy. And then they came with the Mark IV, and that had the, poor quality 4K and all the crop factor and everything like that. And I was like, oh, so close. I was ready to go. I wanted to get the Mark IV so badly. And they just
you want the video. That's what
I do want the video.
Interested in.
Yeah. I mean, I want the video, but I want great stills. I want a great stills camera as well. And I loved Canon for the stills. I mean, if I could have the Canon still capability with the Panasonic video capability in one body, that would be the perfect camera for me. But again, Canon just kind of let me down there, and so had to completely switch from them. But I'd say this camera is interesting. It's a good step in the right direction. I'm glad to see Canon putting 4K into something other than their C series of cameras. But again, their implementation of it still feels like 5 years back. I mean, it's 4K at 24p. Their slow motion is 120 frames at 720p. I mean, I look at that and I look at what my GH5 can do, and it's just like there's night and day. There's no competition there. Although it is a much cheaper camera. If it were between this and like the GH4, I would take the GH4 in a heartbeat over this. I mean, that was shooting 4K 30p, 3-4 years ago. So
that's fine. Craig was a little bit incorrect. It's not a Micro Four Thirds. This one, the M50 is actually a APS-C.
APS-C. You're right. Sorry.
It's APS-C.
Yeah. But still mirrorless though, right?
Right. Still, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sorry, you're right.
So does that mean it takes the? It can take any Canon lens, right?
No. You still have to put an adapter. You still have
okay.
Yeah. But you can use your like you said, it's like $100 for the adapter. Yeah. The other idea about it is regarding 4K in my line of work, shooting for television news, 1080p is fine, and my editors don't want me to send them large files anyway.
Right.
They're perfectly happy with my 1080p. And then as far as global shutter, while it is a great idea and everything, most of my shots, I set my camera, and I get I get a few seconds of B-roll here, a few seconds of B-roll there, whatever like that, and then so I'm not running and gunning like that where we have a problem like a documentary film or something like that.
Yeah.
So again. But I'm still not buying one. I'm not ready yet. No. That said, praise is set aside. No, I'm going to wait for full frame.
Does your camera even shoot 4K?
No, sir. I have a 60D because I like the flip out screen.
Right.
Yeah.
I haven't upgraded to 70 or 80D. Well, that's another story. Anyway.
I'm not a gearhead, but I feel like in DC, when I did this purple walk the other day, all the big wire photographers are there, and Sony, everybody's talking about Sony, which may not be the direction you want to go, but in DC, that seems to be what everybody is switching to.
What'd they say? What was their reason?
I mean, I saw like 2 wire photographers shooting the mirrorless, the silence, the speed, like 20. I don't know that much, you know, I don't follow this stuff that closely, but 20 frames per second. But yeah, I mean, you had to switch out all your lenses if you go that direction.
Or you get an adapter. I mean, you know, if you know,
on the Sony,
speed booster, I think. Yeah, I would say that's one of my favorite things about the 4/3 in electronic shutter is that you can turn off the, you know, the actual mirror and you can just shoot silently. And I think that is just so convenient when you're trying to go about and tell a story without being, you know, trying to be that actual fly on the wall.
Actually, one photographer told me, she said she feels like she has more access on the hill with the silence, that like it's just so jarring hearing the click, even when it's on, you know, slow and it's less noisy, that it just makes people aware and react. And she feels like she's getting so much, you know, she's getting more just by her silence. And I thought, hey, that was a good selling point.
She needs to invest in a sound blimp. That's all.
Oh yeah, those are so hard to shoot with. Oh my gosh, you're like your hands in those. I hate these things.
I'm hoping the prevalence of micro 4/3 and electronic shutter is so you know, we get to a point where like when they eventually do the handoff from Trump to the next president, you won't have a billion shutters going off and like drowning out all other sound.
Yeah, that was quite amazing. Some of those the press pull, and all you can hear is just shutters going off. You can't hear anything else but click, 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 click.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting if we get to that day when, you know, again, you see the giant mass of photographers around a subject and it's just silence. That'll be interesting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think Sony's
little red lights going off.
Sony's coming out with a lot of great cameras. The A9 is a very impressive camera. Shoots 20 frames per second. I don't know what the megapixel count is, but it's a incredible high speed frames per second for that high quality, and just really coming out with some awesome low light cameras and stuff. The A7S, A7S III is coming out soon. So yeah, I think Sony's a great manufacturer, great stuff. I don't know. I tend to gravitate more towards what Panasonic is doing. But I mean,
who was it talking about the A9 at the Olympics, that the shots weren't that good coming from the A9? Somebody was just talking about that. Or Sharky or somebody else.
I don't know.
That the A9
it may have been Joe. Maybe Joe McNally was talking about it.
Joe, maybe, yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I think he was messing around with the A9.
Anyway,
but I mean, Evelyn, do you get any camera envy watching these Sony shooters and thinking like, ooh, maybe I have to switch? Or are you like, okay, I'm okay with my cameras?
I like my cameras. I'm pretty comfortable with them. I'm not, you know, the 5D Mark IV really was a big change from the low light. Shooting in low light with that camera has been really great. And so this is the time when I really felt a difference in my gear, and I love it. However, the silent, I mean, this friend of mine I was talking to was definitely selling me on the Sony. She's like, oh, it's quiet. It's 20 frames per second. You know, I don't have 1DX. So that would definitely be something to consider. So, yeah. But it weighed, you know, with the big 7200 on there, weighs as much as what I'm carrying.
That's right.
Really. So if you put a prime on it, fine. It's a lot smaller than than any Canon, you know, heavy body. But when you put a 7200 on it, then it's the same. Yeah. So you don't have that small, lightweight feel. So we'll see. I'm waiting for.
I would say if you're gonna go, I think Sony, because Sony is the full frame mirrorless, I believe. But if you decide to go micro 4/3, it's so much smaller. Like, you know, let me just show you. This is one of my lenses right here. This is a 100 to 300 millimeter lens.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very tiny. And then of course, if you're talking about.
The thing I couldn't.
It's a slow lens, f3.5 to 5.6. This is the f2.8, 12 to 35. So you're 35 to 70 equivalent right here.
The thing that I'm not interested in switching is how you look. It's like looking at a TV screen. I think that will take a while for me to get used to that. I don't know how you do, but it just doesn't look like what you're looking at through your, you know, SLR.
You're a dinosaur.
It is a little jarring.
It is. I guess
it does take a little bit getting used to.
The light looks different. It's like looking at a 1D image versus a 3D image, right? I mean, I don't know. Right. Okay, I'm really not a techie, so I just held this camera the other day and I was like, whoa, what is this? Yeah.
But you know what doesn't suit you, which is, that's the main thing.
Yeah, I guess you just train your eye. It's like shooting a rangefinder. Always looked funny to me too. So yeah, I'm sure I can adapt. But
you do get used to it after time. And actually, when you start not only getting used to it, but using the features that come with looking at a viewfinder that's a screen, it's pretty neat. Like, for instance, manual focus. If you ever shoot manual, you get a nice little sort of peaking that shows you like little blue dots that shows you what's in focus. And that's really great if you're shooting at a very low aperture, or if you're just, trying to shoot manually, getting that nice little assistance and just being able to see what your actual exposure is going to look like as you're shooting it. So you can adjust as necessary. It's pretty nice.
That's what my colleagues
said. And instead of having a chimp after the fact.
Right, exactly. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
So our final topic this evening I picked because I thought Zach would be on, honestly, because it's about film, and I know Zach loves film. But and we can talk about film. I know that Evelyn, you started out using film, so you got the film background, and Craig, you've used film, right?
Half a dozen rolls years ago.
Okay. Well, then, me and Evelyn can talk. I'm in. But let's talk a little bit about film. It's always a fun topic to bring up here. So T-Max P3200 film is coming back from Kodak. In pieces of renaissance with regard to sort of the film. And I remember using 3200 film back when I was learning how to use film, because it was just such eye-opening experience, because you could shoot pretty much at night, and get this imagery that was exposed and could be actually used, and it was just again a revelatory experience to have this 3200 ISO film. It was like cheating almost. So I think 3200 film is pretty neat. Film in general, though, I'll never go back to it and never use it again. But it is neat to see there are some aspects that are coming back. Evelyn, any interest in film at all? Any interest going back?
I sort of had this. Yeah, I think it might be fun to go back, but I'd probably go to do something totally different, like large format or a medium that I haven't worked in. Because I quit film. I was shooting film and I was a holdout. This was in I don't even know. Reuters, we had a couple digital cameras. They were humongous and they had terrible resolution. But I was covering a bombing when I first moved to Nairobi and Mombasa. I just left Israel. I was like, oh, now there's another attack, or there's a plane flew into a hotel. And I had to run around trying to pay shop owners to open their stores and get my film developed and scan it. And there was no internet. And then I said, that's it. And I bought my first Canon digital camera. So I have a memory I was digital, changed my life and I would never go back. But now that I've been shooting for so long, there is something that you miss about the dark room and the graininess and, unrolling it from your camera. I mean, I do miss it. I could see doing it for fun, but practically I think it would be difficult to get back into it.
What was it like working overseas, with film, and just how'd you again deal with film as a medium in terms of getting it around? Again, you just shoot it and scan it and email it, or how'd that work?
Yeah, shoot, scan, email, exactly. I mean, there were the days when I always heard stories, was maybe 5 years before me, where people, if they were in Bosnia or something, where they would just FedEx their film to the magazines. Right. And they'd always be sure if somebody would be flying out and take my film. And I thought, well, that would actually be easier than what we had to do. But usually you can find I never had to do it in a bathtub or in the desert or anything like that. But you'd always find a store. There was always a photo store, even in Somalia or even, wherever you were, you could find one place that would develop film. And you often had to pay, this situation in Mombasa at 10 o'clock at night and there was a bombing, just keep your store open. But the scanning in, with little electricity and using, sometimes you have no power and you'd be in an inverter in your car trying to scan and keep your laptop on. Wow. It was pretty challenging. But it worked, but you'd be able to only send out one picture sometimes, on a sat phone. That's all you could do. You really had to pick your best image. So I guess my wire service training was good for that, because now I send like 50 images for every assignment I shoot. I'm sure my editors like hate me, but I don't want to have to decide. So yeah.
Oh, now with the infrastructure in America, I mean, for the most part, it's nothing to send a whole batch of images,
Right.
and usually they want that because they're going to make an image gallery or something out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a good thing you do that, Evelyn. Imagine that photo you have of Baron in the limousine would not have been one of your picks, right?
It would not have been. Oh, no. Well, that day, that was all I saw where I was. So that was my image of the day, because I didn't see the president.
Nice
and
thought, Ron.
I saw people. Yeah, there wasn't that. That was what I was waiting for. I was waiting for the motorcade. So, and you don't know, you might get the president walking out, or Melania or Barron, but that's what I got. So it worked. That was the image.
It did work. I mean, you got recognized for that image, and one of the top 100 photos of the year.
Yep.
What was your first digital camera, and when did you switch?
So, okay. So when I worked at Reuters, we had these giant things. I think they were Kodak even. They had like long.
It was a Kodak body with a Nikon. It was probably an N90 body with a Kodak back, right?
Yes. So those were.
You had a little like serial port on the back. You had it plugged in via serial.
Wow.
Yeah, we're really going back. So something like that. They were humongous, and they were like 3 megapixels or something. I don't even know.
And they didn't have a viewfinder on the back, right?
No, I don't. I don't remember. No, I don't think. No way. They were just like a solid.
Oh, you could not check that then, yeah.
Yeah. But my very first one I bought was Canon, like a Canon. I don't know what the model number was, but I was a Nikon
The first
shooter.
digital camera that they came out with that was affordable was the Canon Digital Rebel. That was the first sub $1,000 digital camera.
It wasn't the Rebel.
DSLR.
It was
20D.
20D.
Yeah, that was my first digital.
Right.
So
I shot Nikon. I was a Nikon film shooter, but their digital stuff wasn't as good as the Canon at the time. So that's when I switched to Canon. And I think you're right. It was a 20D, and then they sort of every couple of years would upgrade, and now I'm up to the Mark IVs. Yeah. So maybe it's time for a change, because like I went from Nikon to Canon. Maybe it'll be Panasonic or Sony or who knows.
Come over to the dark side. Panasonic will accept you.
Yeah.
Well, if you're looking to lighten your load, go Micro Four Thirds. If you want what Sony has, go with Sony. I'd say you can't go wrong with either. I think both of them, Panasonic and Sony, are making great strides. Nikon is even, I have to give props to Nikon for their D850. I think that's a great camera. If you were to go back to Nikon, I would tell you that would be the camera to go to, because that's an impressive camera in terms of what can it do. So, but again, I'm Micro Four Thirds for life now. But when I went digital from film, I never went back. I was like, this is the way it is, because I was tired of shooting, scanning. You're going to make it digital anyways to do anything with it. So just go skip out the middleman.
I've definitely not gone back, but I could see in the future someday wanting to shoot wet plates or something crazy for fun. I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah.
My first digital camera was a Sony Mavica that took the floppy disks in the side.
Yes.
Yep.
I went to an event one time where they were shooting with that and giving it to people like with their print. And I'm like, who has a floppy drive nowadays? This was like 10 years ago. And I was like, who has a floppy drive?
Yeah.
Everybody's like, CD drive. Come on, get with the time. Anyways. All right. Well, we're coming up to the end of our show. Evelyn, is there anything you'd like to let our audience know about, for people who'd like to see your work or connect with you, or just something you'd like to plug?
I would like to plug the Women Photojournalists of Washington. I was the vice president until this December, but I now chair our portfolio review, and it's March 11th for anybody who wants to come on the East Coast or from wherever. We have 31 editors right now coming. We have James Estrin from the New York Times. We have Marianne Golan from the Washington Post, Sarah Lean, National Geographic, NPR, Vox, BuzzFeed. It's all on our Facebook page, WPOW.
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 I saw your logo. It's like, wow.
Right, that's us, the Women Photojournalists, WPOW. So it's a really impressive event. It's at the Corcoran School of Art and Design. So we bring in the top people. You get a ticket, get your portfolio seen, and it's a really fun day. So I would plug that. But you can also visit my website if you want at evelynhochstein.com.
Indeed. We'll have links to both those in the show notes, so you can go get to that easily. And I hope that you'll go and you'll tell all your friends at the event about your wonderful experience here on Around the Lens. Because we would love to have more women photo journalists on the
Absolutely.
program.
We posted this on our Facebook page today to give you.
Well, tell them they are all invited to come on the show.
Okay.
A lot of times this turns into, I'll be honest, a sausage fest, unfortunately. But you know, we'd love to have the female perspective more often. So again,
well, I really love being here. So thanks for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
Cool.
Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. Craig, is there anything you'd like to promote besides yourself?
Gosh, just myself. Craig got Stampfley at on Instagram, and stampfley.photography is my home website.
All right, great. Ron?
Sure. Look at my Instagram. You see the protesters.
That's it. The friendly protesters.
The friendly
Ron Photo Hawaii.
That's right. Ron Photo Hawaii on Instagram. Also, if you're in the Philippines, watch Net25. You can see me occasionally on the TV show there, Eagle Broadcasting Corporation, Eagle News.
Very cool.
And you can see me one time on the Eagle Broadcasting Network.
That's right. We had Dave as a guest one time. That's right.
Do they just run my first segment over and over on reruns?
Maybe. It came on
should.
at least
They
once.
should.
It was at least once.
Those royalties will be kicking in soon, Dave.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
Anyways, this has been Around the Lens episode 113. I've been your host, David J. Murphy. Again, go to aroundthelens.com to connect with us. I want to again thank our guest, Evelyn, for taking her time out to be with us tonight. I truly enjoyed your conversation. Hope to have you back on in the future.
Would love to.
And of course, I want to thank, of course, my co-hosts at this point, Ron Hamilton and Craig Stampfley, for being the best darn co-hosts in the business. Anyways, I'm David J. Murphy. This has been Around the Lens episode 113, and we are out.